Sustainability is not about one big ticket item that you can tick the box and say you've done the best you can. It's about literally thousands of small initiatives.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Our mission is to show the many paths to net zero for an industry that is one of the hardest to decarbonize. So every week we speak with airline, airport, travel and technology executives to help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you're a frequent flyer, an airline executive, if you care about sustainability, or just love traveling, welcome aboard. This is a show by Simpliflying, who have been helping build trust in travel for over 15 years. This season of the podcast is brought to you by Cirium, which is empowering the global aviation industry to reach a more sustainable future with the most accurate aircraft emissions data. The show is also supported by Carbon Click, leaders in managing carbon offsetting programs for top global airlines. Without further ado, here is your host, Shashank Nigam, CEO of Simpliflying.
Dubai has a reputation for large, ostentatious projects. Yet, what struck to me in my conversation with Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai International Airport, is the little steps that Paul is taking every single day towards a greener future. It's not about a grand net zero goal, but the little things that matter. And I was blown away by how much Paul and his team are already doing, from solar panels to planting trees. Let's hear what Paul is doing at Dubai airports to make travel greener from an airport perspective. Welcome once again to another episode in which, for the first time ever, I have the CEO of an airport with me, not an airline, who is Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai International Airport, one of the largest international airports in the world, especially since the rebound after COVID-19. Paul, first of all, congratulations on your recent sustainability award. Not many airports win sustainability awards, but you've just done that too.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be here, and I'm privileged to be the first airport CEO to feature on the program. That's really good to know. And thanks so much for your congratulations on our sustainability award. I mean, the reason for this, I think, is one thing we have an abundance of in Dubai is clearly sunshine. And it would be very remiss of us not to use the natural resource that we've got access to generate electricity, which of course is going to be the very most effective way that we can decarbonise our footprint here at Dubai. So in 2019, we put 15,000 photovoltaic cells on the top of our building at Terminal 2 on the north side of the airport. This generates something like 7.4 million kilowatt hours per annum, which is quite a substantial contribution towards the footprint of the airport and saves us about 3.3 million dirhams in energy costs. So it really did help us reduce the load of the terminal electricity supply by about 29%, significant amount. And it saves, I think, something like 3.2 million metric tons per annum in carbon emissions, which is, very significant. And the project was carried out in association with our national energy supplier, DEWA. And I think it's one of the first of many projects we'll do in partnership with various companies across the airport, because, as you said, sustainability really shouldn't be one of deflection, it should be one of action. And what we believe is that we must do our part to make absolutely sure that the green credentials of travel are established as quickly as they possibly can be.
Wow, this is very impressive. Just to dissect this a little, you said you managed to reduce your energy bill by 29% with this solar farm. Is most of the energy being used for airport operations? Are you selling some of this energy to the grid? Is there access? What's next for the solar farm?
Well, the idea is that it will directly contribute to the energy consumption that we have. Because, of course, one of the problems with being in a hot country is we need to apply a lot of energy to cool our buildings and infrastructure to a temperature that's tolerable for the people that are in there. And as you can imagine, this consumes a huge amount of power. So the energy we produce from the Terminal 2 solar array goes directly to offset the electricity consumption of Terminal 2, and that's where the 29% savings been achieved.
Right. No, that's fantastic, and congratulations on taking this step. And I hope to see solar panels on every terminal roof in Dubai, given how huge the airport is. Now,
that's our
before the
intention.
pandemic,
Absolutely.
exactly. Now, before the pandemic, in 2019, there was an interview in which you spoke about a green, immersive future for airports. We are, of course, now 3 years on from the pandemic. Tell us a little about this goal and how you're actually progressing towards this.
Well, clearly, obviously, the pandemic rather distracted a lot of companies away from their traditional business goals and objectives, but I think we kept our vision intact. And of course, a lot of the new infrastructure that we're designing at the moment will have the highest level of green credentials that we can possibly establish. And as I've mentioned, building in photovoltaic cells is definitely a way of ensuring that we've got the sustainable building projects in the right area for the future. But there are other things. For example, the photovoltaic cells are obviously only effective during the day, but at night, obviously, they don't produce any power. And using things like batteries is expensive. Producing batteries is actually not that green. And what we're thinking is there a way of holding the cooling energy that we've injected into the buildings for a long period overnight so we can keep the buildings cool at night and then increase the retained cooling energy during the day? So a lot of engineering expertise is going into the design to make sure that we create a building that is not just sustainable by producing power from the sun during the day, but through the whole 24-hour cycle, we can continue to rely on the energy that we generate using the green source of the sun.
Wow, that is very interesting, and it's not something I was familiar with. So, is this something you can do in existing terminal buildings, or is this only for future developments?
Slightly more difficult to retrofit to an existing building. But what we are doing is doing a huge program to reduce the energy footprint of our existing infrastructure. I mean, we've replaced, hundreds of thousands of light bulbs across the estate with the latest LED technology, which saves up to 90% of the consumption of traditional halogen bulbs. But there are other things like putting smart control systems into our air conditioning plants so that they're more responsive to cycles during the day when they're actually required based on occupancy of certain areas. And I think there's a lot you can do actually to use existing plants much, much more efficiently and to cut down the carbon footprint of the energy consumption that we've currently got. So lots and lots of things. And I think sustainability is not about one big ticket item that you can tick the box and say you've done the best you can. It's about literally thousands of small initiatives. And it's really getting people to understand how important a subject this is and to get people to embrace the opportunity. I'm far more interested on what we did yesterday to make sure today is more sustainable than the day before than I am in motherhood statements saying in 10 or 20 years' time we're going to be carbon neutral, or we're going to reduce our footprint by X percent. That seems a bit tokenistic in some respects. So I'm much more interested in an action-orientated agenda where we can do thousands of small things to make a real difference here and now.
Right. It's the little things that matter. And I love your approach of constant improvement around sustainability. You mentioned, of course, a big goal around net zero. Does Dubai Airport have a net zero by 2050 or 2040? Do you have a net zero goal target?
What we're doing is we are evaluating what we can actually do and in what time scale. I'd much rather have something practical where I can honestly believe that we have a strategy and an action plan to deliver the difference that's necessary. So I'm not really in the position where I would like to say we're going to be net zero by a certain date. Let's just make sure that we have a trajectory of continuous improvement and we work towards the fastest possible way of improving every day rather than announcing a goal and saying that that's a great PR stunt and then resting on your laurels knowing that someone else is going to have to deliver on that promise at some stage in the future.
Exactly. No, I think that's very well articulated, and thank you for that. We've seen a lot of airports, airlines come up with, you know, big, hairy, audacious goals, but it's ultimately the little improvements that you're making every single day that matter just as much, if not more. Now, you said it's not just one big initiative that is important. You recently announced a very ambitious program to reduce landfill waste drastically and even turn it into biofuels. I mean, SAF is the word these days in aviation. Could you tell us a little bit more about this initiative, please?
By the middle of this year, we plan to divert something like 60% of all the waste produced at DXB away from landfill. And at the moment, 2,000 annual tonnes of food waste from our food and beverage outlets, lounges and hotels across all the terminals and concourses are converted into compost, and that's used in various growing and agricultural applications. It's taken to vertical farms where it's used. So there is already a lot of waste going into the supply chain to help recreate food and actually produce good from what is currently waste. The other thing, of course, is we are currently converting 100% of all the oil used in cooking into biodiesel, and more than 40% of the waste that we produce is treated or recycled. And the problem is, of course, if you decompose waste, food waste in particular, in landfills, then that produces methane, which is 70 times more harmful to the environment than CO2. So the idea of capturing all of the waste that we produce and moving it away from landfill is going to have a huge improvement on our environmental footprint. So that waste reduction objective of 60% waste reduction is our huge goal to make sure that we do not send that to landfill. And this was basically created in partnership with the BIA Group, which is the Sharjah-based sustainability organisation that we work very closely with, and they're very aggressive and innovative in this area.
Very, very interesting. Now, a number you mentioned there, 40% of the waste is recycled into biodiesel. Is this used in airport operations? Do you sell this to airlines as SAF? Where does this go?
Well, the 40% actually is treated or recycled. That's the waste, but 100% of the cooking oil that we produce is converted into biodiesel. That's actually used in a combination on airports and also off airports. So long as it goes into the fuel supply chain, it doesn't really matter where it's consumed, because obviously every litre of biodiesel that's consumed is a much more clean result than taking regular hydrocarbon diesel from conventional fuel sources. So every bit helps, and I think it's a bit like electricity. So long as you're reducing the carbon footprint somewhere by using electricity from clean sources, it doesn't really matter where that's used, because you're avoiding the use of electricity produced by conventional hydrocarbon fuels.
Right. No, I find it very encouraging, and I feel that both of these things, the biodiesel production as well as the solar farm, can be a model for many other airports, because ultimately airports are not flying them. They're fixed buildings and you can replicate a lot of these initiatives. Yet you're an ecosystem. In fact, your largest tenants, is the Emirates Group with Emirates and Fly Dubai. How do your sustainability initiatives dovetail with that of the airlines that operate in and out of DXB?
Well, clearly, the consumption of aviation fuel is the largest single contributor to the carbon footprint of aviation. There's no denying that. And also, it's a pretty difficult subject. And sustainable aviation fuel, which is the hot topic at the moment, I think is going to prove in the long term quite a challenge, because clearly the production challenges of SAF in sufficient volume to satisfy the aviation industry are immense. And I think at current projections, the production of SAF won't even keep pace with the growth of aviation for the future, yet alone replace traditional Jet A1 as a source of power for aircraft. So it's a very big challenge, but we do work very closely with not just Emirates and Fly Dubai, all the airlines, all the ground handling concerns, and everyone to look at ways of decarbonising in the quickest and most effective way. And one of those, of course, is to go to electric-powered vehicles or possibly hydrogen. But of course, what you have to do is look at the entire supply chain. There's no point in going to an alternative source that is just as carbon intensive, just at a different cycle in the whole supply chain. So we're optimistic that our program of increasing the production of our solar energy will actually be well matched with the introduction of electric vehicles on the ground in Dubai. And if that is able to happen, then I think we'll have a dramatic improvement. We'd like to be the first airline to be able to say that we've got a ground transportation fleet that's entirely carbon neutral across the whole supply chain, not just because it's an electric vehicle taking power from conventional sources, but that we've generated enough solar energy to power the entire electric vehicle fleet in Dubai. So we're working on that project at the moment closely with Donata, the handling company at the airport, and we're obviously keeping close touch with our airlines as they try and move towards a sustainable source of future motive power for aviation, which is obviously a very difficult subject.
Right, exactly. Talking about sources, I think you hit the nail on the head. You can't just say, let's have electric vehicles, but the grid is not green. You have to feed in through solar energy. I love the loop that is coming. But there are these next generation aircraft coming, in particular, hydrogen and electric hybrid powered. How are you preparing for this? For example, hydrogen requires a lot of storage to store at the airport compared to the conventional Jet A. Is this something you're proactively planning for?
I think the technical challenges that need to be overcome before we see an alternative to conventional jet fuel, be it sustainable jet fuel or conventional Jet A1, are immense. Hydrogen-powered aircraft, electric-powered aircraft, even nuclear-powered aircraft are a long, long way off from certification, because clearly the challenges of producing, storing, and consuming alternative fuels requires a complete rethink of the whole supply chain, and the engineering of aviation is going to fundamentally change all the way along. And the difficulty at the moment, the production of some of these alternative fuels is equally carbon intensive in production, and therefore doesn't actually create benefits. Because if you are, the production of hydrogen, for example, is incredibly carbon intensive, very energy intensive. So, as I've said just now, you have to look at the entire supply chain and just check that your credentials are right and you are actually making a difference in the net production of CO2 overall. There's no point in having a supply chain, for example, that requires a lot of exotic material in production of batteries, that is very, very carbon intensive to produce, and then produces an outcome that's less efficient than the ability to use Jet A1. The problem is, of course, we're one of the only industries where we have to take our fuel with us everywhere we go. And there's nothing as calorifically dense as a gallon of Jet A1 at the moment per kilogram. So it's very efficient as a fuel. And that's very, very difficult to replicate that efficiency with electric power or hydrogen at the moment because of the various production and storage challenges that both of those alternative fuels have. So my personal view is I think it's going to be many years before we see a viable alternative to the current process of using a hydrocarbon-based fuel, whether it be a sustainable fuel or a conventional fuel. So we are going to have to use a drop-in solution with conventional motive power for aircraft for quite a long time to come. Therefore, it'd be a bit premature for us to start designing infrastructure around alternative fuels when we don't know what those alternative fuels will be and what the impact on our airport infrastructure will be.
Fair enough, and thank you for answering this question in a frank manner. It shows, and I appreciate that. One of the things, of course, that many people may or may not be familiar with is you manage both DXB and DWC, the other large airport in Dubai. Are the sustainability initiatives at both the airports in sync? Do you use DWC for a pilot and then scale at DXB, or the other way around? How do you manage both the airports' sustainability initiatives?
Well, obviously, DXB is the major hub. It's the home for Emirates, who's our principal hub carrier. It's also the home for the more than 100 airlines that serve Dubai. DWC is the first stage of the recreation of a new airport, which we believe will eventually replace DXB when it's fully developed. But obviously, we're already at a capacity of over 100 million. So to recreate that capacity in a new airport is going to take some time. And clearly, we've got to design the airport to be the next generation in terms of passenger convenience, operational efficiency, and crucially, obviously, the ability to operate the airports in the most sustainable way. So we are quite a long way from achieving that objective at the moment, and it takes some time to get there. But the idea is that we will migrate DXB to DWC at some stage in the future. But for the moment, we've clearly got to continue to invest in DXB as the major hub, because it will be probably more than a decade before we do move the operation to DWC, like Stock and Barrel.
Right.
So and that's the strategy between the two airports at the moment.
And are you able to use then, because there's not that many airlines operating out of DWC right now? Is your intention to use DWC as a sandbox for sustainability initiatives, or will you just replicate what's being done at DXB?
Well, actually, DXB is much more practical in terms of testing all of our various initiatives on a large scale, because obviously we've got the biggest challenge in terms of energy consumption. So most of the initiatives I've described have been based at DXB, and we've translated a lot of those to DWC, because obviously the size and scale of DXB is such that we get the immediate benefit from the initiatives at DXB, and we can then copy those over to DWC and achieve the same impact there. But obviously the traffic at DXB is so many times greater than it is at DWC. We get the greatest environmental benefit by using DXB as our test bed.
Right. Okay. No, that's good to know. Of course, given it's one of the super hubs internationally, right? Dubai airports, you cater to passengers from all over the world. Yet there are reports that show that Americans or Europeans may be very concerned about sustainability initiatives, or Far East and South Americans may be less concerned, whereas in the Middle East and Africa, there are definitely other concerns. I remember my last trip to Dubai airport. I was in the duty-free queuing up behind a lady. I think she was flying to Kampala or Nairobi. And she had 4 cartons of detergent in her hand that she was checking out. And I was just amazed that people were buying detergent from duty-free. You've got people who have definitely very different priorities, right? So on the ground, what do you see? To what extent are passengers from different parts of the world looking to become more sustainable? Do you see being sustainable as an airport as a commercial advantage when appealing to customers from different parts of the world?
Well, I think it's actually going to be part of the credentials, which will be our license to operate in the future, just as safety and security. There are international standards that we have to meet and exceed, hopefully, in most cases. I think sustainability will become one of those things that you either do and stay in business and grow your business, or you don't, and you become known as someone who doesn't have regard for the environment. And our customers will vote with their feet ultimately. They will actually determine how passionate they are about the credentials that we have. But one of the things I think is a major benefit is that obviously airlines that operate at DXB mostly have larger aircraft. And of course, some of those aircraft are much more friendly to the environment than smaller aircraft. Scale and environmental consciousness tends to be something that's reasonably linear in the aviation world. So because we have a relatively high throughput of passengers per aircraft movements, that gives us, I think, sustainability credentials that are probably better than other parts of the world. But I think, the challenge that all industries and the whole of humankind across the world faces at the moment is that the care for the environment has to be up there as our biggest strategic challenge at the moment. And I think, if we don't address that and we don't actually demonstrate that we are taking steps to become responsible corporate citizens in our chosen industry, then I think people will start to react. They'll fly less, they'll use airlines that have got better credentials than others, use airports that have got better credentials than others. So I think, you either adopt the challenge of the environment and do something to meet those challenges and survive and grow, or you wither and die because you decided not to prioritize your care for the environment. And to me, that's a very binary choice. It isn't even a choice. You have to choose the former, not the latter.
I like that view of the world, actually, because it's something that has to be done. So let's just do it right. Which airports do you think are doing it right when it comes to sustainability?
Well, I think the West Coast, San Francisco in particular, Los Angeles as well, they're doing a huge amount because, of course, the environmental concerns that they have there are very much part of the DNA of the population locally. And I think some of the work they've done there on sustainability is very laudable, and we've discussed with them their sustainability initiatives. And I think sustainability is such an important thing. Anyone who comes up with a solution has a duty of care to the world to share it. So I think they've done that well. Of course, Scandinavia, you cannot ignore, where the government has taken a very proactive view on the environment and has required the use of sustainable aviation fuels, the use of hydroelectric energy, all sorts of other natural clean energy sources are mandated. So I think they're showing the way, really, in the total population taking sustainability very carefully. One thing they've done is they've removed the tax on electric cars. So as a result, every electric car sold in Norway doesn't attract tax, but petrol and diesel cars do. So there's a very high propensity of people to buy electric cars in Norway, which I think is a very laudable outcome.
Yes, I recall reading somewhere that Norway has the highest number of Teslas in the world per capita. So that would explain it. You mentioned LAX and San Francisco. Are there certain forums you're part of with some of these top airports discussing sustainability, or do you participate in the ACI accreditation around sustainability? Are you part of these multilateral initiatives?
Yes, we were accredited by ACI, I think in 2016, as a sustainability partner, which obviously was very good news. And we do discuss with airports around the world. For example, at Dallas-Fort Worth, they generate a huge amount of their electricity from wind power. For example, in Texas, they have a large portion of the electricity supply generated using wind power. And Dallas-Fort Worth has a very high proportion of its electricity generated using that system. So, yes, there are practices around the world, but I think the thing is, you see, the solutions to a sustainable future are very dependent on the local conditions. And I think every single airport has to look at the easiest and most productive way of reducing its carbon footprint. And clearly, in some locations, that's going to be one method, and in other locations, it's going to be a different one. Our big benefit, of course, is the abundance of sunshine. So solar power will always be the most expeditious way of reducing our carbon footprint and giving a source of clean energy for us to consume.
Right. I think you're definitely a beacon of light, no pun intended, when it comes to solar farms and using solar energy. Of late, internationally, just still thinking global, we've seen the rise of climate activism. So I think late last year in 2022, there were climate activists who blocked a runway in Munich or sat in front of an aircraft or a private jet in Amsterdam. Of course, this has not come to Dubai yet, but is it a possibility that you might face a disruptive direct action like these climate change protests? And is this something you're preparing for, and how would you respond?
Well, I think the answer is that, look, provided you are taking this challenge seriously and you can demonstrate the practical steps you're taking to address it, then hopefully you'll get more sympathy than you will protest from people who care about the environment. You know, we care about the environment. We are very concerned about the carbon footprint of aviation. We want to do everything we possibly can to mitigate that carbon footprint extremely quickly. And I hope that our progress in this field, compared to other places in the world, will be brisk and productive enough to make protests unnecessary, because they won't produce any faster action than what we're doing at the moment.
Right. I think you're right. It's important to be prepared. And I thought the Schiphol CEO did a good job responding in his letter, appealing to these activists, talking about what the airport is doing for sustainability as well. Now, still staying on climate activists, just because it's becoming an important topic as flying comes back, they have two demands. One is they want to ban all private jets. Dubai has its fair share of private jets landing and taking off, and they want higher taxation for flights, so frequent flyer taxes, for example. How do you respond to each of these recommended measures from activists? Are these even practical?
Well, I think, first of all, one has to say that reduction in consumption, I think, should be something that people have in their conscience. And, you know, if you make a decision that you want to reduce your own personal carbon footprint, that can be done in many ways. And choices whether to fly or not is part of that. What car you own and drive, how you mobilize yourself, how you heat or cool your house. All of those things, I think, are personal choices, and people do tend to make their own personal decisions about how much they are prepared to invest in reducing their own carbon footprint. And I think the thing is, what we have to do is to get that into every single person's human consciousness, to actually understand that we are all polluters of the planet, and that we all have to do our level best to minimize that carbon footprint produce. I think, as far as independent action to, create taxes on aviation, the difficulty, of course, is if we could be absolutely sure that such taxes go directly to reducing the carbon footprint produced by aviation, then that, I think, is a mechanism that needs to be arrived at in consultation. The difficulty is that many governments around the world have a poor track record in this area, and they will announce taxes on aviation for a particular purpose, but that the revenue produced by those taxes just disappears into the government general budget. And I think the thing is, there has to be some link between any form of penalty levied on aviation and the proceeds from that penalty or agreement should then be directly invested in reducing the carbon footprint. And then once that carbon footprint progress has demonstrably been achieved or is on the way to be achieved, then actually the investment and taxation or levy that's made should be reduced. But I think governments probably have the role to set targets, and the industry has got to come up with a solution to make those targets achievable and have a pathway to achieving it. Taxation sometimes is not actually a very effective and efficient way, a very blunt instrument, and I think, unfortunately, in certain cases, is probably open to abuse because the revenue generated from those taxes doesn't actually go anywhere towards reducing the carbon footprint and helping the environment.
Yeah, I think the UK government is a case in point here with all the taxes upon from Heathrow, and nobody knows where that's being invested. And I like your idea of what if there's a frequent flyer tax, which then goes to, let's say, subsidize SAF for a flight, and it's invested back into aviation. We, of course, only have 27 years to reach the aviation net 2050 target. Are you an optimist? Do you think we as an industry can get there?
I think it's a massive technical challenge, and it will rely on the ability to develop an alternative source of propulsion for aviation. I think it also depends on how we look at different modes of transport. I think there's a huge environmental benefit to be had from completely transforming how we use our road and rail systems across the world. And I also believe that that will have an impact on aviation, particularly in the short to medium haul markets, because I think the big problem that we've all got to face is, as I mentioned earlier, aviation by necessity has to carry its fuel with it. And there is no solution to make it more effective than a gallon of Jet A1. There's nothing more calorifically dense than that. So I do think that over time, there needs to be a massive technical breakthrough, as well as a shift in everyone's attitude to how they travel. And that will actually help us reach those targets. 27 years is a relatively long time. And as you know, technology is changing quicker than ever before. And whether we could have an alternative power source, whatever that power may be, that's practical for use in aviation within that time, I'm fairly optimistic we will get that technical breakthrough. But it doesn't stop me doing something every day to think of new ways of reducing the carbon footprint we currently produce. I'm not a believer at all in just waiting for a solution to arrive out of thin air and then being the panacea for all ill. So we have to do something today. We have to do something to work towards a permanent solution.
Right. And I think that's what gives me the most hope, that you're making a little step, you're taking a little step every single day towards a greener future, not just a big goal. I wonder, by the way, on a personal front, do you measure your own carbon footprint from flying, or do you offset your own travel? Have you personally started taking some measures?
Absolutely. I personally invest hugely in sustainability. My house in the UK, for example, is completely hydrocarbon free. I generate my electricity from a solar array. I heat my house from a ground source array that's powered by the solar energy. I don't have any other sources of energy other than from clean, sustainable sources. So I hope that that goes some way towards being practically a demonstrable climate champion, but I would be modest enough, hopefully, to say that it's a small step, and I'm sure we could all do more.
It's all about small steps. This is quite fascinating. Do you completely live off the grid in the UK then when you're there?
What I do is I export as much power to the grid that I can, and then, of course, I draw on the grid. The problem is, of course, it's night and day, isn't it? And of course, in the UK, particularly in the winter,
right,
we do not have very long days at all, so it's not possible to generate as much solar energy as is required in the winter. But in the summer, definitely, I'm a net exporter of energy to the grid, and hopefully that compensates for me being a net importer in the winter.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear. Now, the final part of this interview is what I call the rapid fire round, in which the listeners get to learn a bit more about you. And these are simple questions, and I'd love to hear, the first answer that comes to your mind. So, for example, Paul, what's your favorite book?
I've got several favourite books. It's quite difficult for me to be precise. I love ancient French literature, the novels of Prosper Mérimée, for example. The Outsider by Albert Camus. I don't have one in particular. Contemporary books, I'm greatly inspired by, Amit Rusbrugger, who wrote a book called Play It Again. He's a musician who was the editor of the Guardian. And I drew the inspiration from that because in my spare time, I'm also a musician.
What do you play?
And I play the organ. That's my first instrument that I love. And
Fantastic.
he set himself the goal to learn a particularly difficult piece in a year.
We should get your marketing team to set up a YouTube channel for you then for your organ playing.
Maybe we should. That's a very good suggestion. Thank you. So I loved Alan Rusbrugger's book Play It Again, which described his journey while he was editing the Guardian newspaper. He learnt that one of the Chopin ballads, which was a very fiendishly difficult piece to play, and my response to that was to learn the Maurice Duruflé Suite No. 5, which is a very difficult organ piece, and I played it in Westminster Abbey a few years ago.
Wow!
That was my goal, and it was a really satisfying personal challenge.
Congratulations! I'm very hugely impressed on this. So, is that what you do in your free time? Do you love to play the organ, or is it something
I certainly do that in my free time. That's my consuming passion.
Okay, fantastic. What's your favorite movie? We start with the book. What about movie?
Well, actually, I love Delicatessen, which is quite a dark movie, and also in the same genre, Amélie, which is a beautiful French movie. And most of the music I play is French romantic music, so I'm a real francophone.
Wow, and do you speak French yourself?
Un petit peu.
Un petit peu. What about your favorite airline? This can be a tough one.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, look, you can't live in Dubai and not travel on Emirates and see the fantastic service they deliver. I think what they've been able to do is provide quality at scale. And I think those two things don't normally go hand in hand. It's an incredibly impressive operation. And of course, I worked for Richard Branson for a long time, so I have to include Virgin Atlantic in there as well. So joint first place, Emirates and Virgin Atlantic.
Two good choices. Favorite city? Please don't say Dubai.
Well, if I can't say Dubai, I have to say London. It's my hometown. It's a fascinating city. I love New York as well. You can walk every day in New York and have a completely different experience every single day of the year. So London, New York. I have to include Dubai though, because it's been my home for the last 15 years, and it's a fantastically progressive city today. Definitely a member of the first world.
Yeah, it's changing every single day. That's what fascinates me about
Absolutely.
Dubai. Every time I go there, it changes. What is something that you still want to learn?
I want to learn to play the complete organ works of Olivier Messiaen. They're very hard, and there's quite a lot of them. I play a couple of them at the moment. Actually, most of your listeners will probably not want to hear me play them because they're quite an acquired taste, but they're very, very rich musical tapestries, and he was just such a fantastic composer.
Wow. I think I'm going to ask my producer to put some organ music as background music for this podcast now. I'm very truly inspired. And finally, what's the best advice you've received?
Best advice is pursue your dream, follow your passion, and never give up.
Fantastic. Paul, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I'm truly inspired by the little steps that you're taking every day, both in your personal life as well as professionally at Dubai towards a greener future. And I'm sure that will be an inspiration to a number of airports and beyond, whoever's listening to the show. Thank you once again, Paul.
Well, it's a great pleasure. Thanks so much for taking the time. I've really enjoyed participating. And if those little steps can produce, they say from little acorns, mighty oaks do grow. Let's hope that that's the case with sustainability. Every small step we make today will make a big impact tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the work you're doing, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. Awareness is the key to a green future, so please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing us with your network or leaving a review. For more information on how aircraft emissions data can help you reach your sustainability goals, visit Cirium from the link in the show notes. You can start a conversation with us at podcast@simpliflying.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website, simpliflying.com, and join the movement.